Hi everybody, can you do let me know when you can see and hear me, and if anybody is on here. Sarah Paint, hello Sarah. I'll say this if you want. So do give me a shout out, say hello. Oh, Catherine, thank you, Catherine. You can see me. I'm presuming you can hear me as well. Clear Customs, fantastic. Hello, Mark. Mitzi, greetings, one and all. Hello, Linda. Fantastic. Thank you for that feedback, Tish. That is great. Coming to you today in high def, so hopefully that'll kind of work out well. Hello, Rose and Elizabeth and Susan and Grace. Hello, Grace. Lovely to have you on. I think I've toured on Monday for ages. I'm trying to think when I last did it. Obviously, not toured this weekend, so but it's a long weekend. It's a bank holiday, so hello, Susan. But I can't think when I last toured on a Monday. So a bit of an oddity. It still feels like the weekend. We want to see the wellies. Okay, okay. Let's give you Wello vision. Hang on. We'll do when I switch the camera. I'll give you Wello. Hello, Karen. Hello, John. Joining us from Florida. Hope it's sunny there. It's nice and sunny here this evening. So hopefully, hello, Rachel. Thank you for your support. It's most gracious. Thank you. So we're about 8 o'clock, shall we? Holiday here in the United States. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, it's only been listed today, Dawn. I wasn't quite sure kind of what I was doing. It's been a bit of a sort of sad weekend. I mean, I know a lot of you replied to my post. Thank you. I lost my kind of favourite auntie. Mum lost her sister. Just coming into the weekend, so kind of put a sort of bit of a hello, Lizzie. Put a bit of a doom. You know what it's like. Sort of sad, bit nostalgic. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But anyway, I just want to take the weekend off and just kind of be doing just with family and stuff. But anyway, I thought I'd do a tour this evening. And of course, the other thing is it's rained. My goodness, has it rained? No, has it rained really bad in London, Leslie? Hopefully, usually Sam Thompson. Yeah, Sam's off doing other things at the minute. A lot of guides are. It's coming into main season. But you've had an awful lot of rain. So I'm glad you're doing a tour. So am I. Thank you, Mitzi. But let's not dwell on that. We'll talk about it a little bit. Just because this person I'm taking you to is nostalgic, and I'll explain that in a bit later. But let's kind of let's get started, and I'll give you a bit. We've not been here before, not the most picturesque. Insofar, never in London. Let's come over here by these large daisies, and they're not Michaelmas daisies, are they? What they're called, but they are lovely. And I'm going to tell you. So hopefully they're coming through that high def is doing. Let's go and just stand amongst the flowers because of what wellies on. So those who want to see wellies. There are the wellies. So where we're going to be is very boggy. So I know this is called marsh thistle in here. So very boggy. But just to kind of get you started, not very picturesque, but just useful to know where you are. We're just off the A64. So if I just kind of pan across here, I think every dog walker's got well-worn wellies. That bridge that you see there, the red brick, that's a bridge over the A64. So a flyover, as you might say. And underneath is towards Copmanthorpe. I grew up in Bishopthorpe. We were kind of arch rivals, like Bloods and Crips, Bishopthorpe and Copmanthorpe. And next to it, at Acaster Malbis, you might see. Remember on the Jew, Richard Malbis? Still to this day as a village named after him, Acaster Malbis. So that's kind of the villages from beyond Bishopthorpe. So Bishopthorpe, where I kind of grew up, is about a mile from here in that direction. And York a bit further down. But this is the old A64. Oxide Daisy, thank you. And it's kind of no coincidence that the A64, the sort of main route that takes from York all the way to the Scarborough and leads the other direction, runs on the top of a glacial moraine. Because once this was the only dry route across a vast fen. So fenlands, very kind of wet. Just going to walk through these. I'm feeling it's that kind of tour where we should just do it, just experience nature. And so do we know what a moraine is? So a moraine is basically a material that's been left behind by a moving glacier. And this material is generally kind of soil and rock. And just as kind of rivers, if you think, sort of carry along debris, don't they, and silt that eventually kind of builds up to form sort of deltas. So also glaciers transport all sorts of dirt and boulders that build up to form what we call moraines. And there's all sorts of moraines. This is a terminal moraine. This is the end of a moraine. I'll tell you about that in a minute. But when the glaciers stopped moving, the reason is they were starting to melt. We were going to a warmer period. coming towards the end of the sort of main ice age, as you might say, about 13,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, that sort of time period. And of course, what happened then is it created Great Lakes. So the landscape around here is not actually natural. It's been created by dumping sort of glaciers, debris upon it. So under this moraine sits Triassic sandstone, Jurassic mudstone, so the ones that are hundreds of millions of years old. But this whole landscape is kind of coated by basically the crap and debris left behind by glaciers. So this raised moraine here enabled the building of a road by the Romans. So you come on the route of a kind of Roman road here into York. York's probably about maybe 2 miles or so, 2.5 miles to the centre of York. So it's still used, obviously, the Roman road today. And either side of this glacial moraine is wetland. And that's where we're going into the bog, into the wetland. Obviously, the Naesmire, you'll know, kind of floods, that's very damp as well. Got very heavy clay soils in York. So you've got a low-lying valley, which is obviously where wetlands, before the kind of drainage measures were introduced. So basically, everything these days tends to be a lot drier than it would have been historically. And so Dringhouses, which is where I live, became known, we think, because the Romans call it drying houses. In other words, it was a raised up area where they could actually get in and dry the animal skins to obviously make leather and so forth. So it's long been associated and recognised that this is a kind of a high dry bit in otherwise very boggy, marshy area. So the landscape is kind of hugely shaped during the last ice age, and the kind of accumulation of hundreds of thousands of years of glacial activity. So glaciers are formed when kind of ice sheets, and where we stand was the western edge of what was known as the Fenno-Scandian ice sheet. And I've got a picture. It's only got one picture today, but I kind of like this, just for those that kind of sort of, I may have mentioned this before about ice bridges and so forth, but this is the Fenno-Scandian ice sheet, which basically, as you can see, covers all of northern Europe. So during the last ice age, you've basically got a solid ice bridge. So you've got obviously most of Great Britain there, or at least the sort of the top 2/3 of it. And you've got Norway, Sweden, Finland, all the kind of Baltic countries. You've got Denmark. So all that is all under ice that is hundreds, if not thousands, of meters deep and thick. And this is how we end up with kind of woolly mammoths and all these kind of incredible animals over here because of the bridge they wandered across. It was a bit warmer because we were on the kind of western edge there. But basically, that was what you'd have found here. So nobody lived here in the last kind of ice age. Far too cold. Southern England to a degree, obviously Central Europe, but clearly not here for obvious reasons. It was just life in the freezer. They're like living in the Antarctica now. It's not really supporting human life. Let's get rid of that, and but hopefully that's a. Oh no, that didn't work, did it? Yeah, we'll try. It wants to stay. It's determined to. It's 15 minutes. So we're coming into now the Askham Bog Nature Reserve. So obviously we'll talk about birds a little bit later on, but we're looking out for, or listening for, woodpeckers, kingfishers. Probably won't see them with my voice because they're very, very shy. Willow tits, also dragonflies will be fantastic. Hopefully, we just don't know what we're going to see. What we're going to do is we'll take a view through. So there is a bit of a walk around, which I'll kind of do. Didn't used to be able to talk about it in a bit. But also I'm going to go into Nearwood as well, and maybe Farwood, but definitely to Nearwood, because that's where the irises are, and that's basically the marshes. This is basically the sort of polite bit where it's all kind of boards and this, that and the other, and you can take your dogs. I'm going in the bit where you need wellies, so it's more fun, but obviously it's more natural over here, and we'll look at the pond as well. So that's what we're going to see. So yeah, we're on the big ice sheets, and of course what happens is over thousands of years, these layers of kind of snow accumulate and they become denser. And of course they become heavier then, and they're kind of weighing into the landscape and to begin to shape it. So the pressure from the accumulated ice causes movement, which results in the flowing sheets of ice. So that's your glaciers basically. So by the way, as we come past, you might notice over here on our left, well you will notice, is a golf course, Pike Hills. It was originally known as Hobmoor Golf Course, and it used to be at Hobmoor, which is very near where I live, and we've been on there on a tour. It's where Humphrey goes for his run each day as Hobmoor. Hobmoor was a little bit small, so it moved over here, I think, in the 1930s. And it still owns, I think to this day, not operated probably by them, but it's a Railway Institute thing. So it's done for railway workers. because York at that time was a kind of major centre for kind of railway engineering and so forth, and the Railway Institute, like a lot of employees in those days, provided a whole bunch of kind of leisure pursuits and so forth, so you could get involved in all sorts of improvement activities, as you might say. Still very much sort of following in that kind of that Quaker tradition in York, of sort of self-improvement. Don't go drinking, and gambling. Get involved in positivity, improve yourself, take up a sport, play a musical instrument, join a choral society, do amateur dramatics, whatever it kind of might be, but just make the right sort of choices. So these employees were all about kind of making it easy for you to make those kind of choices, which I think is really nice. Fox and Helen's pub, that's not too far away from us here. Hello, Janice. So yeah, it's okay, Janice, we're sort of walking towards now. The fantastic 1080 is working great. So just to make sure, you should have a little cog at the bottom right, I think, of the screen. And you should see a little red HD coming through. If that's coming through, that means you're watching in high definition. If it's not, and you haven't got that, click on the cog. You should see then quality, video quality, something like that. And click on that and you should be able to get 1080, which is HD. So there we go. So it's a lovely sunshine by there. It's evening. So good evening, one. So hopefully the picture and the sound are working just nicely. So Askham Bog was kind of formed in the Vale of York, and it was a kind of hollow that was flooded by meltwater from the last glacial retreat, which is about 15,000 years ago. And two regions of what they call terminal moraine. So there's various types of moraine. I can't remember the names of all of them, but terminal moraine basically means it's the front. You imagine like a snowplow. Think of like a snowplow is really good. I know like you're in places where you get a lot of snow. Think of what happens when you push a snowplow through. Some of the snow will go to the side, won't it? Some of the snow will kind of go over the top, but some of it will just like be pushed at the front, won't it? Yeah. So the terminal moraine is stuff at the front. So basically, it's what's being cleared out as the glacier moves along, and basically, what that means is it's also acts like a brake, if that can make you imagine. So as it starts to melt and the mass declines and the weight of it, and its movement starts to slow down, then basically the terminal moraine kind of builds up and it becomes the natural kind of land break on a glacier. And so that's what you had either side of here. So that kind of forms the steep sides then, if you like, of the moraine. And then isn't that pretty? And then you get two ridges, and the meltwater then all kind of drips down. And of course, what happens is then the land becomes extraordinarily waterlogged. And that's what we're going into here. So Linda was telling me on Facebook she's never been in a bog before. And basically, it's a waterlogged land. So all the plants that you're going to see on this tour, and I don't know the name of half of them. What we'll do is we'll go to the ID boards and try and store them in memory banks. And then you guys can perhaps either remember what they are, or you can remind me, or you can like have a little look while we're on the tour, and we can try and work out what it is that we're kind of looking at. But as you can see, with all this grit. Oh, sorry, mate, I didn't realise you were behind me. I do. They jumped out my skin then. The chap behind me. As you can see, it's pretty high. I mean, these thistles and cow parsley, I'd say somewhere in those are probably 8 feet in height. So it's very verdant. It's very, very abundant. Everything grows very, very well here because obviously dog grows. Thank you, Susan. It is a nature reserve. Obviously a lot of nettles as well, so I'm going to try and avoid getting stung. But this really is, as you can see, if I go backwards now, you can see it is very, very high indeed. We really are starting to enter into the jungle. I never thought I'd come here before because I thought the signal would be rubbish. And then I came down here last week and the signal was great. I was like, oh, I'll come. Never thought it would be. So here you see here, we've got people getting ready, their drivers. So as I say, Pike Hills Golf Course, very nice. In the evening sunshine. England have tips. Yes, it does, and you have to watch that for the dogs. We should try and keep Humphrey away from the very long grass because ticks are a flipping nuisance. So, America's the old Route 66. Alpha. So, let's have a look at this board over here. So, it changed in the season. So, spring is saying willow warblers announce their arrival from Africa with a setting ripple of notes, whilst a distinctive cuckoo chant proclaims the presence of another increasingly rare visitor which calls out its own name, cuckoo. So early on, marsh marigolds provide an impressive display in the wetter areas, followed by water violets. Orange tip and brimstone butterflies, the first on wing, may be seen in search for elusive sources of pollen. So we're looking out for a four-spotted chaser, an orange tip butterfly, flag Irish, which I love. We're going to go into the field and see some flag Irish because they really do like their feet being wet. So it's very marshy on there, but they look stunning, I think. It's an admirable butterfly, I don't know what that, no, peacock butterfly rather. Some willow warblers, willow tits, some bumblebees, brimstone, marsh marigold. So yeah, it is nice, and this changes, you know, through the seasons. So the interpretation boards. So water violet, I know there's a lot of that around. So cuckoos, and maybe we'll see a frog or two. And the thing to do is just to take it easy, take it steady. So as you can see, at the minute we're on the duck board, so you can see it's kind of raised platform, and over here we come to a little bridge in a minute. I'll give us our kind of first. So this is our first view of the flag irises. So I was really surprised. I didn't realise that the irises, you know, A, were happy in such acidic soil, but also like being sort of wet. But it just shows that there is a species that is kind of happy and can adapt to any environment you pick from it. So here's a first nice cluster. We'll go down in a second and have a look at that water, but just to give you a first shot of these iris, I think are truly wonderful. I absolutely love them. I'll just duck under here. So this is why I've got the wellies on, so we can get in and close. So look at those, aren't they beautiful? I absolutely love them. Yeah, so Lindsay raised boardwalk. I mean, I'm now sort of probably about 2 foot below, so if you can sort of see I've stepped off the boardwalk. It's kind of keeping up, but yeah, aren't they just gorgeous? Just so delicate, lovely drooping lips, petals. They've got lovely kind of central coloration there. Looks like they've been sort of got wet, doesn't it? But they've all got this very distinctive, sort of slightly darker, almost brownish centre point to the drooping petals. Isn't that magnificent? No, they're very common in boglands, wetlands, Leslie, but nowhere else, because obviously what you've got here is you've got a bunch of species that are incredibly suited to this environment, but most plants wouldn't like this, if that kind of makes sense. In other words, you've got an ecosystem here that sustains certain types of flora and fauna and invertebrates and you know, wildlife and so forth, but not others. Not a lot of plants like to be, you know, have their feet sort of so wet. Let's just walk over and give our first shot of the water. So Askham Bog really is a kind of remnant of what you call saturated sort of landscape, and it's hemmed in on 3 sides. I start getting the movement. I love just being still by water and then just watching the movie. Get the pond skaters. So pond skaters, you know, these little fantastic animals that they can just skim across the water. They're brilliant, actually. They've got like hairy feet, and if you do this, but they're so light they don't break the surface tension of the water. So when you keep holding it on, you should start to see little ripples, and it's these little invertebrates that just skid around and have a fantastic time on the water, which I think is just epic. I love kind of watching that. Only seen blue irises. Yeah, I mean, the blue and yellow was the distinctive one, isn't it? But yeah, yellow flag iris, very, very common in this. We'll talk about that in a second. Very, very peaty. So look at that. Isn't that beautiful reflection? So that movement that you can see, they're actually pond skaters. And I say that they're just going to skid around on the water, and they're so light they don't break the surface tension. But like ants, they can carry enormous kind of bits of, you know, bark and whatever else they need to kind of create their kind of habitat. So this is kind of hemmed in on 3 sides. You've got the golf course, the road, and a big park and ride on that side. And believe it or not, they wanted to build 500 houses very, very nearby. As ever, capitalism doesn't really seem to care too much about nature, did it? And it took an enormous concerted campaign. In fact, Yorkshire Wildlife Trust came through and they were fantastic. They own this, they operate it. But Sir David Attenborough got involved. And I put a quote in the title of here, called it a kind of a cathedral of natural conservation, because it is home to so much of a variety of flora, fauna, insects, you know, invertebrates, you name it. They call here. I have Irish reticulate in the spring. They're tiny and shy. Oh, lovely. You know, it really was incredible that they wanted to build kind of 500 houses very, very near here, which, you know, it was almost certain was going to do devastating kind of damage to this landscape that, you know, had this ancient woodland, you know, that's sort of 15,000 years old, this landscape. It just sort of seemed wrong. But so eventually, even though the council, you know, kind of obviously tried to put limitations on it, ultimately it was the planning inspectors that sort of said no, so it was kind of taken out of their hands. And I'm glad it did, because it just doesn't seem right. And thank you, obviously, to David Attenborough for being part of that, because it's so special. I mean, this is... There are estimates that 10% of Britain's natural diversity is present here in this few square kilometres, which is nuts, right? The 10% of the birds, 10% of the flora, 10% of the fauna. You imagine there's a huge amount of diversity, right? In this area, you know, for a suburban kind of reserve, it's absolutely incredible. So fantastic that they turned down that. And these bogs are kind of increasingly rare habitats as well. They are very much kind of under threat, under peril, as you can imagine. And, you know, for the most part, over the years they were drained because people wanted to farm. And so consequently, yeah, we'll just have a look at this water for a little bit. Look at the reflection. You know, people obviously wanted to farm. And so, of course, irrigation, drainage, and so forth, as well as peatcutting, we're going to talk about in a minute. So, I hope you can hear the birds singing nice, yeah. So the bog at its kind of bottom has a layer of boulder clay, sand and gravel, which kind of seals it, which means moisture can't escape through. Look at that, you can't tell the difference, can you, between what's real almost and what's reflection there. Isn't that lovely? So in effect, that's almost like a sealant at the bottom, like having a pond liner. And you got above that, you've got all sorts of organic deposits which kind of you sort of fossil where oil comes from and stuff, you know, all that kind of like the insects and everything that kind of comes down to becoming fossil fuels. And then there's more layers, then there's layers of peat. So Lacey mentioned about the peat. This was a absolutely you know, massive site for peat. And the reason, or part of the reason for this, is that the fossil records show that common reeds colonised this bog, and what this did was this reduced the amount, so you can see reeds here obviously, it reduces the amount of open water, and basically the open water then sort of stops flowing quite so well, and you get what they call fen peat builds up in the bog mud, and it pushes up the height, and so consequently you start to get these little mini pillars, if you like, of peat, and this increased elevation of centre cuts the bog off from then the direct influx of water elsewhere, because obviously water doesn't typically flow uphill. So consequently it cuts off. So let's have a first walk through. It's a bit of I'm climbing over barbed wire for you guys. So this is the kind of tour this is. So we got our first sight of the royal ferns. As we go over. Ooh. Hopefully I'm not going to fall over. It's a huge ferns over here. Hi Julie. Talk about ferns a little bit. So you see now, I don't hear my squelching, but it is very moist here indeed. And so let's bring in. Are these called raging? Swing. Oh god, I can't think what this is called. I do know the name of this, but one of you will know, I'm sure. It's beautiful. Lots of creatures in here. Yeah. Lots of furry critters, and you know, everything kind of water voles. You can find foxes, hedgehogs, you name it. So here's one of the irises, a bit more open, which looks absolutely beautiful, doesn't it? Buffering. Are we buffering? Are we? Okay, I'll move back. It may be that the signal's not great here, so we'll ragged robin. I knew it was something like that. Thank you. So let's come back over. If that was a ragged. Thank you. I do love so much. So ferns, we're going to talk about a little bit, because there's lots and lots of ferns here, and this is an absolutely no. There's certainly no alligator or snapping turtles here. No, there's nothing of that order. Again, just kind of coming over, you can see how these irises are absolutely sitting with their feet in the water. So they're kind of really happy with these conditions. So again, he's having, isn't it, the right species for the right environment. It's getting that right, isn't it? So they're going to marsh this so it's not out in flower at the minute, but we'll probably come across one or two that are. So I'm going to try and get over this again without falling over. Oh my god, it's so squelchy, that mud there. Did you hear that squelch when I went over? That was downright antisocial, how squelchy that mud was. Yeah, so what happens is as the peat then kind of builds up, it's going to cut off, so the groundwater runs off instead of running in, and so over time what happens is the soil becomes more and more acidic. So again, it's then very specialised, because a lot of plants, you know, just can't live. You know, it's like you need ericaceous compost these days, isn't it, for certain plants? So in that kind of same situation. But a lot of plants just don't like a strongly acidic soil, and what happens is in the peat is over time it gets more and more concentrated. until something happens, which we'll talk about in a minute. But also, a little bridge over here. I think we'll go for this style as well. And we'll go into the wood. I'll give you your first glimpse of the kind of woodlands. So then you got obviously rainfall sort of leaches out the water of the raised peat. So you get over and over, you get this kind of concentration of acidity. And so this became a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful source of peat. One of the difference between a bog, a marsh and swamp is we don't really have swamps in the UK, or at least not to my knowledge. But certainly the difference between a bog is something that is, well, it's a peat bog basically. It has very specific, oh gosh, a second, very specific conditions insofar as it kind of soil, acidity and so forth, and it is completely waterlogged, whereas marshland can have dry areas as well. To my knowledge, I could be slightly wrong on that, don't absolutely sort of quote me, but I think that, you know, bogland is all waterlogged, whereas you say something's a bit marshy, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have marsh on moors and so forth, where some of it will be dry, but other bits less so. But again, let me bring up some bogs and mist. Yeah, it's definitely a bit spooky, but it's wonderful too. But it's very, very boggy. So the word boggy, that's what I'm getting right now. So my boots are dropping down into the mud. So dating back to basically the Roman times, really, Askham Bog was used by local communities as a source of peat for fuel. Biggest thing with peat, of course, is it burns very nicely. And obviously what this then created was a kind of mosaic of habitats. Because as you removed the peat, over time what you start to do is you start to create trenches, right? You imagine? And so then they're lower. And so suddenly you have got an area where natural groundwater can run in. So it starts to change the acidity, the pH and everything. So you start to get a more diverse environment. Does that make sense? Oh gosh, I'm so wet here, I'm going to head back. I can barely stand up in that. It is so boggy, this bog. As bogs go, it's a very boggy bog right now. We've had an awful lot of rain in kind of recent days, so it's not hugely surprising. So this kind of legacy of the peat cutters creating ditches then starts to vary, if you like, the environment. And we know that from the sort of early Roman period until the kind of the middle of the soggy boggy of the 18th century, Askham Bog and these areas have kind of been exploited for so I'll just kind of show you my boots so you can get a sense of what I'm walking in. So it really is very, very kind of wet conditions indeed. The things that I do for you guys, honestly. And as ever, you think, well, how do we know obviously that this has been exploited for fuel by the Romans? Well, they found it inside an earthenware pot in a well. So they found what they call sphagnum peat, if that's how you pronounce it, preserved in a well from the Roman era. So we know they're using it, they were cutting it, and they're coming here. And so I'm just going to get a drink of water. Hopefully you're enjoying being outdoors. I'll shut up and listen to the bird song. Well, is that the dragon boat race, Julie? I might. Yeah, I know. So we got the water. I mean, everywhere you look, either you've got absolute water courses, and a lot of these water courses were then actually cut them by the peat cutters in order to kind of to preserve the areas. Because what we know is that by looking at ordinances of Dringhouses and Acomb, we've got kind of written bylaws by the Man of Dringhouse and the Acomb Court Rolls, which restrict peat cutting by tenants. In other words, they recognise the impact on the environment, you know, all the way back into the medieval period. We sort of think that, you know, thinking about the environment is a kind of modern day thing. Well, no, I mean, it is when people recognise there was a sort of a limited resource, and people going at it, just basically unrestrained, it's not hugely surprising. And so there's real severe penalties were put in place. As an attempt by the local authorities to sort of counteract this kind of damaging intensity of the peat extraction here. So the response, because of being sort of created this sort of how do you call it? Topological? Is that right? It's topology, isn't it? A landscape. So basically, the peat cutters were changing the landscape. Topography, isn't it? So topographical changes. That's right, isn't it? From the original kind of geographic area, from the formation after the kind of the sort of glacial melt and so forth. So and in turn, what they were doing then is lowering the acidity, because as you can see, so we get it here. That reeds here in the water is a very, very... Yeah, there are snakes here, Janice. I mean, there are pretty much every form of wildlife, not obviously kind of lions and tigers and bears. Has Copmanthorpe got serums? Well, I don't know about there was a man of Copmanthorpe that existed in the medieval period to write them. I mean, there may well have been. I do know of the man of Bishopthorpe. I'm not sure about Copmanthorpe, actually. So, I don't know. But... sphagnum is an environmentally friendly alternative to chlorine in swimming pool sanitation. Fantastic. It's amazing what things are alternative. One thing that I learned not so long back, which amazed me, I never knew, was that moss was used extensively during the First World War, because first of all, it's easy to keep sterile, but secondly, it can soak up about 16 times its size with liquid. And so it was used to pack wounds, from people that had terrible wounds in the First World War, were basically given moss to kind of soak up the blood while they could start to deal with the kind of surgery, which is just amazing. I kind of never knew about that. So it just shows, adders, kind of what we don't know. So so basically, the cutting of the peat began to change this environment. But actually, we shouldn't get sort of too sniffy about it, because what it actually did then is it created different mini habitats within this space, which is actually awesome, because then you've actually got, kind of more diversity, as you might say. But as I say, the dikes that run around, they were definitely cut, or we're pretty certain were cut by the peat cutters, who were kind of told to lay off the middle, as you might say. So they created channels, and so these are sort of 17th, 18th century, maybe even 16th century channels that were cut by peat cutters, which I think is fantastic. Over the other side there, if you look, see that yellow? More of the flag irises, which are absolutely all over the place. There's a cultivated hemp here, we know that, and it's particularly intense during the Tudor period, because hemp was used to make rope. So obviously we think of hemp now, cannabis and everything, it was a sort of the same thing, but for a long time hemp was a kind of staple product that was used in rope making. And obviously Britain being a kind of maritime nation, so an awful lot of kind of sea-based craft, there's a huge need for ropes. So basically, the production of hemp was really, really encouraged, and we knew that this space was used extensively for that during the kind of Tudor period. So kind of by royal decree, there was every man that had to produce a certain amount of hemp to produce rope. So that was, again, just beautiful, aren't they? Oh, thank you, Trees. That's very interesting. So we know that there was kind of requirements for the manors to produce sort of hemp, and basically the impact of that again sort of changed the environment. So what you've got is not actually, even though it's called Askham Bog and it's like a nature reserve, and you sort of think, oh, that's one thing. Actually, what you've got is an interconnected set of little mini natural environments that sort of sit alongside one another, which is just phenomenal. We're going to walk in the centre of the wood in a minute. The hemp thing carried on until about the 19th century, by the way, because then they started importing hemp rope from Europe and Russia. It got kind of cheaper to import than it was to make, but for a long, long time, it was absolutely the one crop. So lovely, fantastic ferns, aren't they just brilliant? And these are royal ferns, I think. I'll check that when we get around to the interpretation boards, and we'll talk about that in a minute or so. I'll see the board. I'll just make sure we're talking about the right ones. But aren't they beautiful? And ferns are really unusual because they don't like flower and seed in the normal way, if you know about this with ferns. But actually, if you look on the flip side, you see where these little sort of speckles are. When the time is right, they will be like little seed things that will sort of come off. But they have to, like, is it apples are the same? They have to have, like, in effect, be pollinated by another fern. They can't self-seed, as you might say. They can't just drop the seeds and it grow. So basically, it obviously relies on little critters, I think, to basically, transfer and carry is it pollen? Whatever it is, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not an expert on these things. But basically, it needs the spores from two different ferns to come together to create a new baby. So consequently, but they're really old. I mean, these ferns, they go back, 50, 60, 80, million years. I mean, they are one of the oldest forms of plant life. We'll go for a wander through the ferns in a minute, but the pond is just up here, which is, I don't know what's obviously going to be at the pond, but hope really you're enjoying a little early evening wander, pre-prandial for me at my dinner as yet, so I'm starting to get rather hungry. I think that's a really good point. Cole says plants are smart because they let insects do all the work. They do, don't they? I mean, it's like these irises. They just, they're looking pretty, flirting, flashing their ankles, you might say, and saying, "Come and get me, big boy," because obviously, that's what they rely on is the insects, the pollinators. And you see some little flying there. And this is one of the greatest problems that we've got right now, isn't it? Is the use of pesticides and weed killers and so forth, as well as kind of climate change, is really impacting the numbers of pollinators, which is why it's so important. If you've got a garden, or you've got a window, or you've got anything, any kind of space where you can create some flowers, particularly in cities, because it gets harder and harder, and bees and pollinators can die from exhaustion if they don't get somewhere to rest. So even if you've got a little window box that you can create for a flying pollinator to come and rest, recuperate, have a feed on the nectar, carry the pollen, doing a fantastic bit for nature, because there's just not enough, unfortunately. It's really hard for them in cities. So if you're living in a city, anything, a little window box or something, by a hanging basket by your door, can make a huge difference to pollinators in your neighbourhood. So as you can see, another one of the peat bogs we're coming across. So ferns predate flowering plants. Yeah, I mean, they're prehistoric, absolutely. If we use that term prehistoric, you're bang on. And of course, we know this from fossils. Your beautiful kind of renderings within fossils of ferns. So when you get obviously the imprints, so fossils, I'm sure you'll know, is basically when objects sort of fall into the sediment and get kind of trapped in there around kind of clay and so forth. They can harden, and millions of years later they come out of the solid stone. But instead of making an imprint, you can make your own fossils with a kind of lump of clay and just sort of something into it. So you can see here, I don't know how well you can see, but hopefully in the high def it's coming through. If I had a food coin of pollinators from basket to basket, Susan, you've put that way better than I did. But it's so important because, as I say, they can get exhausted, which is so sad when you think about it, isn't it? You think that they're just flying onwards and onwards and onwards and just not being able to find the pollen. So let's stop here, hopefully in the HD, you're about to see a bit of movement. The key to it is stillness sometimes. I guarantee they won't fly in front of my camera now because I'm saying this. Dragonflies, we may well see dragonflies. In fact, I may just stick on the tripod for a couple of minutes and let's just be still. And if we're still, we're much more likely to, let's get a nice little vista of the pond. It's all a bit muddy, of course, as you'd expect. Let's just stick on the tripod for a minute. But yeah, this idea of kind of creating corridors is such a responsible thing for us to do, and obviously, it's about us responding to the crisis that is happening to our wildlife. Our world is quite literally changing at too fast a rate for nature to adapt. The whole thing of evolutionary change is that it happens over long periods of time, doesn't it? And it might be only the outliers that kind of succeed and prosper, those with longer beaks or can run faster, or whatever it might be. But too much change happening too quickly is causing huge adaptation problems for basically so many species. So the more we can do to help that out, that would be absolutely fantastic. So I wonder why animals used to be so large. I missed that there. Oh, your pride, yeah. Yes, they used to be dragonflies, and didn't they used to use the poison in medical treatments? I think there was a time, before I can remember, but there was a time where you could take a dragonfly to a doctor's and sell the poison which used to. I'm sure some of you will know because you're such a knowledgeable lot as to what that was used for. But there is definitely a use for the venom. So again, so much is kind of covered in reeds, but the water very, very. There, you see some flies now. Look. Every time I try and move towards them, they fly from the opposite direction. They're kind of not keen to be seen. Severe storms. Oh well, hopefully you're enjoying our evening. Can you hear the birds, by the way, tweeting? I don't know how much you can hear from me, but it is absolutely beautiful sound. I'll just take a sip of water. I mean, just there's so many birds, you know, they're just fab. You turn the sound up, listen to the birds. So we'll see what it says on this interpretation board, because I'm not an expert in any of this stuff, by the way. I'm reasonably knowledgeable, but I'm not an expert, so please don't expect that I can share lots of information. But anyway, so we're here. We've been walking around kind of near wood. So again, this is the kind of raised walk around. So this is the pond here. It's an important home for a huge variety of wildlife, from insects to birds and mammals. Flag irises around the pond edge, a vibrant yellow in late spring, whilst common reed and reed mace grew up in the water, providing shelter and breeding spot for reed bunting. Under the water, a whole other world exists as great diving beetles plunge to the gravelly bottom, where caddisfly larvae can be found in twigs, gravel and whatever else they find in the protective layer. These insects retain their protective case until they're ready to emerge from the depths of the pond to live their short life above the water. Caddisfly won't feed during this time, surfacing only to mate and breed, ensuring the next generation at Askham Bog. So again, you can see, I'll just give you a little look over here at, that's kind of quite how boggy the bog is on that side. So I'm not going to walk into that because I think I may well leave my Wellingtons behind if I do that. But we'll go in and we're going to go into the centre. I want to show you the ferns. Once they stop cutting the peat, round about sort of 1750s, around that sort of time, I think, it starts then to get a lot more vegetation, the kind of woody shrubs. So basically the look and feel that we've got now was pretty much created about the sort of 17th, the middle of the 18th century. So in other words, by that time they'd finished cutting peat, so you got no more waterways being cut, there's no more kind of holes. So basically the environment can go, okay, this is what I am now, I'm not constantly changing anymore. You know, there's certain bits in the centre that are very peaty and very acidic. There's other bits where natural rainwater and groundwater flowed in, so they're much more the kind of neutral kind of soil pH. There's some bits that are very, very marshy and boggy. Some bits that are a little bit drier, a little bit higher up, and so forth. So you've got the kind of range of environments. It is like 100 acre wood, isn't it? Lovely idea, 100 acre wood. That's such a. Did we go into this one little field here? We'll have one last look at the irises. I'm not sure if we went over this one before we go in and have a look at the ferns in the woodland. Because there's like a basic carpet of ferns. So we'll go over this style. So you definitely will need boots if you're going here. But it's all free, by the way. It's only 24 hours a day, so it's great if you're into taking sort of dump into like photography of dawn and so forth. Let's get down amongst the flag irises and try and get that sort of sun setting in the background. How lovely is that? So I hope you're as fond now as flag irises as I am. The only place I know that they grow is here. No point. And if you do, you can grow them at home. Obviously, you just create these kind of conditions, but they are quite invasive. So the advice is always grow in a pot. Don't put them in your garden, because these things, once they take hold, they can absolutely kind of take over, and they're unrelenting in that respect. So let's just try and get over this bog, the bog of eternal stench. Who remembers that from Labyrinth? So little kind of bits of duckboard to track you. Yeah, dogs are welcome on leads. So Humphrey was down here last week when I was signal testing, and he had a thoroughly nice time. But he was just off the lead, so it's not a brilliant place to bring him, but it's an interesting place for us. So, oh yeah, that was my boot there. Just been out and checked my ferns. They do have a lot of dots. They will do, Michelle. Yeah, they've all got the same. That is how their reproductive system works. So yeah, so about 1750, they stopped cutting the peat, and it becomes used for game then, for hunting. You know, like going shotguns and so forth, and that kind of continues up until up to the Second World War. And at that time, the two chocolate companies, Terry's and Rowntree's, come together, they club together, and they buy this, and then the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust is set up to manage it. So the Wildlife Trust, which is a fantastic charity, give me Google, obviously they look after lots of Yorkshire, but they were set up specifically to kind of manage this. So Francis Terry and Joseph Rowntree, so it was first called the Naturalist Trust, now it's the Wildlife Trust, and that was in 1946. At the end of the war, I think there was a kind of recognition that people needed, you know, kind of places to have that space and quiet. You know, they'd been through an awful lot, whether they'd been active duty or been kind of bombs dropped on them or whatever it was, or worked in very noisy munitions factories perhaps. There was a real kind of importance for kind of peace and quiet. So yes, fairies, gnomes, very, very easy, isn't it, to imagine around here that you would have the kind of little folk. So Askham Bog is kind of thought of as one of the most diverse ecological sites in northern England, especially kind of regarding plants, invertebrates and birds. Tell you what, let's have a look. Shall we walk through here? Hopefully the signal will stay up. I'm amazed that I can go to Woodland and do 1080 streaming, but I want to take you over to see these fabulous ferns because they create this carpet. Aren't they just magnificent? I absolutely love them. I love them. And there's some really high ones. I think that's around the corner. We get the really, really high royal ferns. But these low kind of lying sort of ones, I said, like a carpet you see over here, look. We just get absolutely so many of them. And I think it's just so dramatic. I absolutely love ferns. There's just something, as I say, I think it's the kind of prehistoric element of it. But I find them so dramatic to look at. And I just love walking through ferns. So hopefully the picture is holding up and you're getting a sense. It's got a dappled light that is coming through. And this is really ancient. And of course, this that you're kind of looking at here, this is what England used to be like. You know, at the time of the Norman Conquest, which I talk about so often, 90% of England was ancient woodland. So this is what our land looked like before it was cleared. You know, before all the wood was sort of chopped down, used to, you know, build houses and build boats and, you know, weaponry and this, that and the other. But this is what England was, this kind of green and pleasant land. And it's just, I think it's so wonderful to sort of take a sort of step back in, as you might say, and experience, you know, ancient woodland, whether it's Naesmire Wood, whether it's here, just to kind of get a sense of what it is that we've lost. I don't mean that I'm not sort of saying that in a negative sense, but or perhaps where we came from is a better way. Because the other thing about glaciers is they were great planters. So of course, as they kind of pulled along all this sort of stuff and created this sort of, as it began to make like organic mulch, you know, everything kind of spread everywhere. So consequently, this kind of ground covering that you got from the glaciers was kind of really, really kind of pronounced. So we look at it here now, there's literally no gaps whatsoever between the ferns. But yeah, very different country, you know, but of course no roads. We're a village economy. You know, so obviously people would begin, the villages would be created usually near sources of water, by felling trees, creating clearings and so forth. But for the most part, they'd be surrounded by woodland, you know, and the routes in between villages would be through woodland or over moorland. So, you know, this is harking back really to, you know, an England, you know, as was. And so you really struggle to think why somebody thought, oh, do you know what, 500 houses nearby, that's what we need to do with this. You just beggars belief, doesn't it, of how people's minds work, but that I guess is capitalism and everything it stands for. So this now, of course, is a fantastic place for birds, for for invertebrates. You kind of name it. It's not the same acidic peat bog that it once was, because so much has kind of been cut away. But in doing so, it's created this all new kind of combination of environments that suits so much. As I say, of all the plants, insects, everything you can get in Britain, you're meant to be able to find 10% of them in this area. I mean, that just blows my mind. I think that is absolutely wonderful. That there's something. The air is so sweet, so clean smelling. There's a sort of slight sweetness to it, as you say, that kind of acidity, that kind of bog water. There is definitely a slight sort of tinge to the slightly sweet, maybe a little bit nutty almost. But again, it's probably the vegetation, the kind of the matter. That it just gives us a kind of just a beautiful place just to kind of breathe in, slow down. What's interesting about the trees, actually, though, is you'll see quite a lot of leaning, is trees don't get to be very big here. You see how some of them, they're not many of them straight, because they can't, if you look at a willow, oak will grow in here, they can't kind of get too big for the boots because the saturated ground just won't support giants. So basically, they get too big, they get too heavy, they start falling over, like this one does. So is it a stinky? So not really, Janice. No, it's not particularly. So this what's happening is this tree's getting too heavy because the ground isn't solid enough. So consequently, at a certain time, it's just going to fall over. And so you don't get massive trees, which is kind of interesting. But of course, then, you've got a lot of trees then at the bottom. And of course, once they fall down, they suddenly become insect hotels. So you get a kind of perpetual sense of kind of nature sort of healing itself. But, nothing, it's not great for walking either. It's not humans. Aren't especially welcome here, as you can see, for the bogginess of it. But Kevin Costa, definitely. But you got oaks, birch, holly. There's holly over here. Lovely to see a bit of holly. Lovely plant. Of course, at Christmas, with holly and everything. But just every bit as nice this time of year. So and if you look round, you get lots of lovely lichen. So everything's moss-covered, so you come in at this kind of tree root. So obviously up here, look, we've just got obviously the regular bark you'd expect, but come down below and actually into mosses, and the ferns are kind of coming in as well. So you've got these little mini ecosystems everywhere of kind of the interdependency between plants, which I think is just kind of fab. And obviously you've got rotting wet leaves around here. So consequently, it's an awesome environment for creatures, for critters, for insects, for invertebrates. It's going to make their home. You've got kind of rich bacterial kind of soups. Do you know, I don't know about cypress trees. I'd be lying if I knew what a cypress tree was. I've obviously heard of them, but I'll have to look that up. Find back to tactile. Yeah, it is. It's lovely actually, Susan. It's a beautiful, kind of real rough, and obviously it's a decent sized tree. So I'm guessing by the size of it, getting on maybe 100 years old or so. It's got good roots, but as I say, a lot of them don't get that big and that old because they can't take root enough. They begin to fall under their own weight. So a lot of this apparently is like southern England, insofar as the habitat grows. So we get plants here that you don't really get elsewhere in the north. I've got written these down as notes. I haven't remembered this. Apparently, greater spearwort, March stitchwort, sausedge, March fern, greater waterdock, meadow thistle, and purple small reed and water violets are particularly characterised in this kind of area. So it's a cypress trees, I think. So we've also got the largest colony of rare gingerbread sedge. So I think that's a pink flag. So we Google that and tell me what colour gingerbread sedge is. I know it's over in far wood. I'm not going to get that far across because we're already coming towards an hour, and I don't want to go on too long because I haven't had my tea yet. But I'm enjoying it. And so let's just see if we can get to the thing and find some royal fern. So I can show you some of the big ferns before we wrap. Mediterranean species. Okay, interesting. That's very boggy and wet, so I'm just trying to find an area I can walk back to the raised bed without walking across a channel. Not there. You can see how wet this is. So I'm trying to get back over to this duck board over here. And I'm trying to do it in such a way that I can do it without getting stuck. Oh, this feels okay-ish. Oh, Christ. Not really. No, I think I'll just keep on. I'm going to keep on trying to find a bit that is... I should have plotted this route, shouldn't I? I should have planned this tour, really. But as ever, I didn't really. I said I'd tell you why I kind of chose this place this week. Obviously, you know, as you'll know, I lost my auntie, my lost sister a few days ago, which was sort of unexpected, not unexpected, but much more sudden than we thought. You know, I'd heard that she'd gone in to hospital and it was a matter of days, but then suddenly it was the next day she'd gone. Didn't get a chance to go over there. But, you know, these things, they tend to make you think about the past, don't they? When somebody you've known all your life, there's very few people around now that knew me as a kid. My Auntie Kath was one of those. And so you sort of end up being a bit nostalgic, thinking back, all the nice kind of memories, all this, that and the other. And funny enough, it led me to this place because I used to come here as a kid. Well, more of a teenager, actually, because a very close friend of mine, who was my best friend at the time, had a farm that basically came up against it. And I think some of the land for those houses would have been land that belonged to his farm, but they sold it, it's not their land anymore. And so this is a place that I was very familiar with. We used to kind of come down here and explore. What's different between the 40 years ago that I'm talking about now is you've got these duck boards and you get people. You never used to get people here. So it's quite bizarre for me to kind of come down here and see all these people around, because you just didn't get people at all. But of course, what they've done is they've made it easy to walk, whereas before it was like this. You were kind of walking through the bog. So it was a really kind of cool, sort of special place that we used to come and kind of hang out. So with all that kind of little focus on being a bit nostalgic and being a bit sad and, you know, thinking about the past and nice things, so maybe think about coming down here, which I haven't been down for a while. So I think that's why I thought, oh well, let's come to Askham Bog. And then when I found that there was a signal here, which was the last thing I expected, we were just walking down here with Humphrey, and I thought I'll just have a look at the 4G, and it was brilliant. You know, you wouldn't expect it. So I'm keeping going around because I'm trying to find an area where I'd have to wade through like a channel to get back onto the path. And so far it has eluded me, but I'll keep going. If needs be, I'll just walk through it. It's not the end of the world, but wellies are quite high. But if I can avoid walking through the wet channel. So as you can see, it really is it's pretty wild here, which is I think this looks a bit more promising. We'll find out in just a minute. So getting a bit Indiana Jones now. Last scene. If you put tour guide, last scene. Report me where I am. So I think this looks a wee bit more promising. Aha! Is it? We're about to find out. Jesus. Yeah, I think I'm squelching, but I'm not going through a quad. Last seen in bog, yes, indeed. Is what he would have wanted. Tell him that. So you can see it's pretty long. Here we are. We're back on the duck boards. Hey, back in safety. So let me just give you a moment. And isn't it ace here though? Yeah, just stepping out your wellies is about the least nice thing that you could ever happen to you. It's rotten. So anyway, let's walk on and let's see if we can see some of the royal ferns. I have an idea that around here there's an interpretation sign about the royal ferns, and the royal ferns are basically Britain's biggest species of fern. There is one here that is very tall indeed, that bizarrely they think could be 500 years old, making it the oldest living thing in York, which is nuts, isn't it? You can't imagine that somebody could live that long, but I think, you know, they've got functions that can live thousands of years. So there are certain plants that, in the right situation, can last. And so I'm sure there's a board somewhere around here. So the tree fern, the royal fern rather, is called the royal fern because there's a bent here, someone's memory to Ryan Scrouston. Oh, he died quite recently. That. I wonder if he's COVID. Oh gosh, he's young. 07 to 22. Was that 15? Oh dear, that's very sad. Julie's gonna do a quiet tomorrow. That's fantastic. Hopefully, lots of people involved. So lots more here on this side. Lots more irises. So the royal fern, his Latin name is Osmunda regalis, and I say there's one here with a base that is about 80 centimetres around. Is it here? Here we are. Here's the board about. So this is what it looks like. So quite different. Here we are. This is royal fern. So Osmunda regalis. So it's Europe's tallest fern, and it can grow up to 3 metres in height, which is incredible, right? Like all fawns, it doesn't have flowers to reproduce. Rather, I'm reading this by the way, in case you think it's very well. These boards are jolly helpful. So there's rusty brine spikes contain spores that, when ripe, are carried by water to meet spores from other plants. So again, underside of the leaves is where we're going to find the spores. You see, it's pretty big. This is taller than me. So this is not a huge one, but it's a pretty decent size. Not 3 metres certainly. And so ferns depend on water to disperse their spores. That's right, yeah. Which, compared to flowering plants, is an inefficient way to reproduce. So many ferns these days are restricted to wet places. Throughout history, ferns have attracted mystery and fascination. The Saxon god Osmund the Waterman hid his children in a royal fern, and it's believed that was because the Danes were coming. So he hid them in a fern, which is absolutely lovely, isn't it? And we think that he could be related to, it's like a Saxon god Thor, or a waterman. We don't quite know who Osmunda was, but we believe that was where he got its name. So these are, if you like, the royalty of Askham Bog here. In fact, they're kind of Time Lords, really. They've been here for so long, and have seen so much, and they've survived. And it's absolutely wonderful just to be in amongst you, kind of feeding them and sort of bringing up close, and hopefully getting a lovely sort of picture, and thinking that, you know, these are older than anybody alive, which just, I think it's just delightful. You know, it's wonderful to kind of think. And the really big ones, which are over in the woods, sort of over there, they're huge, but they're sort of a bit shambolic rather than kind of grandiose. They sort of loll around, really. They can't really support their own weight. But, you know, that they are sort of magnificent. But what's kind of neat, you know, is that they are, you know, is when you look, you know, at the bottom of them, you know, that you've got all the kind of stuff going on. I'm just kind of coming in over here so you see dried reeds, the bits of dried, you know, you've got other, again, ecosystems, mosses, insects and everything. So, you know, with this sort of tiny world where you've got spiders, beetles, you know, kind of gnats, you name it, little fairy funguses are in there, all sorts of stuff. So it's like Osmond's children still sheltering, you know, underneath the royal ferns. I think it's kind of a lovely sort of idea of just thinking that these ferns provide shelter and safety for the little ones, because that in effect is what's happening in nature, isn't it? They could tell us so much, couldn't they? Birds, I've got a little list. I don't know if we've got any ornithologists on, but over 90 species of birds being recorded here. They get winter and summer visitors, so as you can hear, loads and loads of bird song. And even though there's quite a lot of human disturbance around here, we've got obviously the golf course, we've got the main road, doesn't seem to bother them. They come out every year. So the resident species we have are marsh tit, willow tit, tree creeper, kingfishers, very rare elsewhere, goldcrest, bullfinches, tawny owls, buzzards, sparrowhawks, and sometimes a green woodpecker. We've not heard one of those. In winter, we get visitors including the fieldfare, the redwing, the brambling, the siskin, the lesser redpoll, goldfish, snipes, jack snipes, woodcocks, coots, and sometimes grasshopper warblers. So, you know, lots of migrant birds find this environment appealing as well. So it really is a bit of something for everyone. And of course, brilliant for insects as well, invertebrates in particular, types of kind of beetles and lots of scurrying critters that I don't know the names of. I'm not going to pretend that I do, but again, lots of them you only find habitat here because they kind of unique combination of conditions here. They find it very much to their liking. So particularly near wood, which is walking through now. So I'm really delighted to have brought you down here. It's been really nice. I say I'm just so pleased that somewhere like this that you wouldn't expect to have 4G at all has got excellent 4G. So we could do it in kind of 1080, so you could really kind of pick out, hopefully, sort of some of the detail. As I say, in many ways it hasn't changed since I was a kid. It's still, particularly once you go off the duck board and you're kind of wandering through into the woodlands, essentially it hasn't changed. And yet it's going to change immeasurably. And it's brilliant because now it's used. Whereas before, it was just about nature. Now it's a community resource, which is fantastic. So hats off to the Wildlife Trust for sort of putting out here the last decade or so. They've put in the walkways. Now you can walk around here all year round. And as with so many nice things in nature, it's great to come at different times of the year. So perhaps we'll come again in the autumn and have a look again at the different flowers that are out, or towards the end of the summer, perhaps rather. We'll catch up with the different flora and fauna. The irises will have gone by then, but others will be there to kind of replace them. So I think it'd be quite nice, wouldn't it, just to come back and have a look at the different type of view. So getting lovely skies coming through now. I've really enjoyed it. Lovely and peaceful, isn't it? Yeah. So let's look over here. So flowers. So you are yellow loose strife, marsh cinquefoil, cinque meaning 5, of course, so the 5 petals there. Purple loose strife down in the centre, and fine leaved water dropwort. I mean, don't you? Is it just me, or do you not think that the names are just beautiful? So I'll let you just take a snap of that so you can read that. Fine leaved water dropwort. Have we even got that imagination anymore to come up with these names? I mean, I know everything's got a Latin names, isn't it, and so forth. But there's just something wonderful, isn't it? I say, oak. So there's an oak tree. So it'll be acorns before too long. Have we got any acorns forming? Yeah, you see there? That's going to be an acorn. 4 little acorns on it. So we've got oak trees. Mighty oak. I'm glad the birdsong's come through. That's fantastic. Another much smaller oak over here. Very oak leaf shape, of course. So oak's pretty easy to spot. I don't know how many good tree spotters there are around, but another oak. Lots of oaks in this part. So we're going to be walking back towards the end. So we'll just continue back. That's where we went into near wood, just over there. And we'll spend another minute or two just looking at the reflections in the water before we wrap, and then we'll start walking back. But you can't have too many reflections, right? It's the law. So hopefully there's dappling light as well. So it will hopefully give us. Look at that! It's like black water, isn't it? Try and get us a nice shot. Conkers, lots of conkers. No conkers here. No horse chestnuts at all here. Well, the nays, yeah. Horse chestnuts wouldn't like this soil at all. So there you go. If any of you think that you've got damp gardens, it just goes to show that there's always brackish water. Yeah, a little bit of salt. Everything has got a home. It's just about finding the right, the right species, isn't it? For your conditions, whether you're in darkness, bright, damp, dry, you name it. There's a plant that we're very, very happy, and little creatures will be very happy as well. So whatever it is we've got, and it's very easy to mow. We've got heavy clay soils, and at times you mow like a bucketful. But of course, it plays a very kind of valuable role. So isn't that just delightful? I'm going to just be quiet for a minute. Just listen to the bird song. So thank you, everybody. Been an absolute pleasure to see you. I've really enjoyed bringing you on this route. It's been one or two surprise folk. Not used to seeing somebody live streaming when they expect an evening walk around, but hopefully nobody's been too thrown by that. But listening to the birds is always an absolute pleasure, isn't it? So, and for any of you golfers over here, if you do fancy coming here, a round of golf is also possible. So combine the two. So thanks ever so much for joining me. It's been an absolute blast. Thank you for liking, following, subscribe. If you're not already subscribing, please do subscribe this very moment by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen there. Subscribe. Subscribe, which is good. And of course, you'll get notifications of what I'm up to, what I'm doing. For those that have left a consideration, thank you so much. Thank you, Julie. It's most grateful. It helps, and it keeps the show upon the road, as you might say. So I'm going to say thank you and good evening. I'm going to walk back up to my car and dash back home and finish tea, because obviously it's quite late. It's past 9 o'clock in the UK, so it is definitely time for me to kind of wrap up. So thank you, everybody. It's been an absolute joy, and I'll speak to you all very, very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.